Hello, welcome to BlackTeaNews. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today I'm excited to have a guest on, Pastor Francisco Vega out of Georgia. And there's so much misinformation today about the Georgia election law, and it's really for an evil purpose, I would say. And that evil purpose is, in my opinion, clearly to make it seem like around the country that we cannot have legislators that are local to be competent enough or that we can trust enough to run our elections so the federal government can take over and they can make laws that are more tampered to the way they want so they can achieve the outcome that they want. It's funny, I did a very popular TikTok. Popular for me. I know. I mean, there's other people making like millions of views or whatever. But I just started my TikTok not too long, like about a month and a half ago, and I've got like almost 15,000 followers. So I'm doing okay. But I had one that had like hundreds of thousands of views, and I did a Jen Circles Back video, and in that video, I was just going over the Georgia law, like I pretend to be Jen Psaki and a reporter asking a question. And so that got a lot of hits just talking about the silliness of the laws. And so I'm going to talk about that and bring on my guests to speak on the misconceptions that people have, how Joe Biden is pushing it like it's the new Jim Crow 2.0. And there's actually in Michigan, there was like 8 mayors who got together. And one of them was my mayor to talk about Jim Crow 2.0. And it's just a silly comparison, especially for people who remember what Jim Crow laws were like. But we're also going to go over some of the insanity of Senator Warnock, some of his doctrine, some of the things that they're pushing, because he is into liberation theology, which is a similar doctrine that Obama was out of. And this sort of doctrine is really messing up our country. But before we hop into it, I just want to encourage you all to go to BlackTeaNews.com, check out articles that I've written there on the site. And if you want to support, you can always go ahead and check out different merchandise I got there, like this cool goat shirt, this Denounce White Supremacy, Defeat Joe Biden shirt. And I'm really into this. I am not the victim you're looking for, because so desperately people want to make me a victim, and I am not today. So go ahead into the website, check out stuff like that. Also, my book's behind me, but you can check out Slay Your Fear, how to overcome a spirit of fear, which I started writing during the pandemic because everyone was just terrified. But then it covers, it's a generalized book, but it does cover some of the stuff that happened with COVID. It covers some of the irrational fears that people have with like a police shooting that's just based off a lot of bad information, that we keep finding out how much people are uninformed about this issue. But just overcoming these irrational fears or anxiety and different things that we have today. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in my guest, Pastor Francisco Vega. Is it okay if I call you Frankie?
Absolutely. Great to be seeing the whole Black Tea audience. It's an honor to be here.
So, are you out of Atlanta, or are you in the area?
Yeah, I was born in the Bronx and raised in New York my whole life, but I've been pretty much as long in Atlanta as I've been almost in New York. So I'm a New York ATLian over here. So I've been over here almost 17, 18 years. So it's definitely home.
So tell me what it's like on the ground right now because there's all this propaganda, I would say, with Stacey Abrams and Warnock pushing about the election laws. And I'm guessing some people have to be into it. But at the same time, MLB pulled out, and that's like $100 million that's gone from all the tourism. So people got to be mad about that, I assume.
Which is terrible, because I actually was afforded a privilege to sit down with one of a few core of Black and brown clergy and civic leaders, and he actually walked through the entire bill with us. And he even also showed us empirical evidence that he sat down with some of the top entrepreneurs in Atlanta, including the athletics division, including the MLB, and walked through the election integrity laws. And they did this as a publicity stunt. This is nothing but a smokescreen to try to do more corporate, virtue signaling, to try to solicit, the God that they serve as the God of mammon. So they're just interested in trying to procure a consumer base. They're not interested in real racial reconciliation or racial justice. This is something that is constantly happening. I was in DC, going back and forth, and almost every business there had signs of Black Lives Matter and did everything they could, and they were completely
Mhm.
looted and burned down. And I watched that with my own two eyes. I stood right in the middle of riots and watched white liberals calling pejoratives and expletives to Black officers and Arabic and Farsi speaking officers, Middle Eastern ones. I mean, I videotaped it. I actually went live on my page and said, "This is who you're leaving your church, Black churches over, and brown churches who won't align with this ideology and this view." And I literally showed them. I said, I was actually there where that trans person actually started stabbing police officers just the week after I left for two, went viral all over the nation. I saw him. I videotaped that guy. He was in there with women's clothing and lingerie,
Wow.
walking in open streets. So yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. I did see that Coca-Cola was trying to walk it back a little bit, like they got to rethink things. We're like, it's a little too late, sir. Especially like it's so crazy that they would go out that way, especially when they got caught during the whiteness um that's I guess inspired by the white fragility book.
Mm.
um I don't understand, like I guess they do that kind of stuff to preference and try to keep them from future lawsuits, to say, hey, we had diversity training, but it's like that's clearly like grounds for a lawsuit. They just don't think white people will do it. They're like the queens and kings of letters, like writing letters,
I'm,
complaints.
I'm going to tell you what I think. I think it's the radicalization, and it's now a multi-ethnic movement. I call it the spirit of Nimrod. Of course, I'm a pastor, and that's all I can be.
Hmm.
I have a sound ethical ethos regarding my theology regarding race and then what the New Testament teaches about it. I think it's a lot of corporatism posing like they care about these social justice issues, but none of them, including Coca-Cola, including Black Lives Matter, who's brought in over a billion plus in revenue. In the week of George Floyd's death, they brought in over $90 million. And you can't show me one inner city area where they have a Black Lives Matter scholarship fund, nothing that even mirrors what our previous president Donald Trump did when Opportunity Zones pouring billions and would have
Hmm.
over six to some estimated 700 or 800 billion, not million, billion in economic empowerment in the Black and brown community. It's incredible, the duplicity. I think it's the radicalization and the pressure of the neo-Marxist tactics to try to not merely radicalize citizens, but radicalize corporate environments to put pressure on, invertebrate CEOs who their leadership only extends on how to be entrepreneurs and not how to be cultural, taking a stand for what's moral and ethical in a culture. And so a lot of them are losing, like Delta, what happened in Atlanta. I'm proud of our governor. He stood up and said, "Hey, we've been giving you tax breaks for years and years because you're an Atlanta-born business and native." And so they removed and lost millions upon millions and millions of dollars in tax breaks simply for trying to this, what I call corporate fiat, where corporate America is trying to pose as a fourth branch of the government. And that's not how it works in America.
Yeah, but you know what I think is interesting, because so many people are like, "Oh, conservatives, they want to bully business, and take Republicans will take it away." And I'm like, it makes sense, because I mean, first of all, people, these kind of people complaining about Republicans reversing it, complain about Republicans doing it in the first place.
That's right.
But they do these tax breaks usually because they believe it will, they incentivize people to bring in their businesses, these major corporations, because they believe it'll bring in jobs. And when you have like a big, let's say Amazon moves in and you do like all this stuff to get Amazon there, then all the people who's like around the area where the Amazon plant is, the restaurants, they got more business there, maybe bowling alleys, or like stuff that people might do for leisure, the mall, like it would all raise up the business. So
It
like
doesn't
people.
make sense to me. So they moved, the MLB tries to take some pseudo corporate stand culturally, and they move it to a region that's 88% white. And this is the blackest, one of the blackest, if not the blackest city
Mhm.
in 50 states is
So they
Atlanta,
go to Colorado.
center of civil rights, the epicenter of supposedly making historic strides, where we have another black senator, and all first gubernatorial runner in the Senate. I mean, all kinds of things. And you shift it to a predominantly white city. See, that the problem is we're dealing with woke supremacy, not really white supremacy. There's
Yeah.
vestiges of that, I'm sure, here all over, incidentally around different, the fringes of our culture. And then black nationalism, all name it. There's dual spectrums there. But I'm going to tell you right now that woke Christianity is false, pseudo social activism that's not rooted in the real spirit and heart of what Martin Luther King Jr. and a group of black small pastors who would meet in churches and say, "Hey, we're going to do sit-ins and do things ethically." And they did put pressure on businesses for real justice. Today, it's completely flipped.
Yeah. Well, I think again, I thought it was wise what the Republicans did because they do things to incentivize because they believe it'll empower their citizens. But if you're going to do things politically to try to bully the legislators who were elected by the will of the people, then yeah, I think it's fair to say if you're not going to be in the best interest of the people, then we're not going to give you the sweet deals that we gave you before. But you're absolutely right about the progressive Christianity. And I feel like there's so much like liberalism and leftism that's just bleeding everywhere. I mean, they have the control of the government. He's not a centrist. He's doing so many crazy things. In our education, it's not, people think you just get indoctrinated in college. They're doing it in the elementary school to your babies. It's everywhere in Hollywood, everywhere on TV.
Trans story time, and one of the main people involved in trans story time was actually, this isn't fake news or false narratives, was indicted on multiple of counts of child pornography. Now, this is sitting in front of our kids, claiming we need to expand their tender consciousness and minds toward what? Sexuality is not inclusion. It's toward normalization of deviancy in sexuality. And it seems like everything with the progressive leftism, and I hate to have to say it, Democrats, this isn't the day of our parents, the blue dog Democrats, just about helping the poor man. This is all about sex fascism. It's like everything's about sex with these people, about some form of sexuality and sexual behavior and sex fascism. If you don't think about it and see it the way I do, you know, you are a bigot, you're a sexual. Now they're trying to make it into sexual racism with this phony Inequality Act. And it's like, what are y'all doing? First of all, we just want marriage and tax breaks and just equality for that. And they have pushed the margin so far that it is not a false analogy or false equivalence to say that the Democrat Party, liberal secular leftism, is the tipping point party. I call them the SS of America. Morally, this is what they're pushing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I 100% agree with that. And I can't believe how many people are just kind of duped. And I feel like Christianity is going to be the last bastion to kind of protect us from all the stuff that's caving in. But we already have people who are basically kneeling, whether it's a long time kind of Black liberation theology just expanding more, but also this woke progressive Christianity. And you know, I think it's so weird because people talk about Black churches and white churches. And when I was a kid, we'd travel a lot. Like my identity or thinking about Black churches and white churches was just like, are you clapping on beat? What kind of music you sing? Exactly. So that's what I was thinking, like when I would hear that. But nowadays they act like it's a whole different doctrine. It's a whole different religion. And even when they talk about Western, I don't know how much missionary work you've done, but like they talk about Western Christianity and stuff. I'm like, what do they think they teach over in other countries?
Exactly. Let me tell you what I believe it is. I believe that they realize this is the same move of the Brown Church, the Bolsheviks. This is the bourgeoisie, you know, versus the proletariat. This truly is a neo-Marxist approach. This really is not new. In the 60s, you know, we had colorism, and communism, written by a predominant author. I can't remember his name. He actually was an African-American leader recruited into communism, wrote an entire book on how they're trying to placate and prostitute Black plight to push socialism and communism. And that was in the 60s. And so it's coming full circle, right? Ecclesiastes 3:1, that which has been is that which shall be. And what we're seeing now is they're trying to represent that to a new, younger generation. And I think what they did is they said, well, you know what? You already know this. Your audience knows this. You guys are amazing. Where it came over from the Frankfurt School, and it was rich versus poor because there were predominantly white Europeans engaging in Marxism. So they had to bring some measure of race involved into the American melting pot because our nation is so unique. So you had these white Europeans in these different nations trying to say the rich is oppressing the poor. So when they brought that here, that's when critical race theory brought that whole narrative into play. But what like you said, because they're having Black versus white, they have to have some kind of Christian play where they can try to divide Christians in America. So now they're using terms like white evangelicals versus Black evangelicals, white Christians versus Black Christians, because they want them to get into this French Revolution mindset where they can divide Christianity and divide the church. And I'm just appalled, Christian, you know, that born again Christians who should be word literate, biblically literate, who can read post across the scriptural ethos of of race in the New Testament are falling for this approach with cancel culture and neo-Marxism and leftism, and they really think certain parts of the Bible should not be applicable to public policy, should not influence your belief, worldview on traditional sexuality, masculinity, femininity, economy. There's a lot of Christians who are being deceived by political false doctrines that have blindsided them because they're just simply thinking false teaching was going to come from within the church. And it's really an outward movement through politics and identity politics and tribalism that is really dividing a lot of Black and brown Christians. They're being completely deceived.
Yeah, and people know that you do have to divide the church. I mean, when they in other countries, when they would, like in China, there is a like sanctioned church where you can preach the gospel, but it's not everything that they sanction, and the true church has to be underground. And then communist countries, you know, over in Europe and stuff, when it first started to rise, they went to the churches and try to talk to them a bit. Like I read Tortured for Christ and with William Winbrand, and he was talking about when socialism came to his country with communism, and at first they were saying some stuff, and his wife was looking at him like, that ain't right. And so she's like, why aren't you saying anything? And he's like, if I say something, you'll have a dead husband. She said, well, I'd rather have a dead husband than a coward. So that it's a great book with a lot of great stories, but people don't see the dangers that people are in with this ideology, and this Marxism, it's rooted in like Black Lives Matter, and it's obvious the founders are Marxists.
Overtly.
Don't let their houses fool you. Like,
what did she just do? She just dropped $3.4 million in 3 years. I mean, you greedy enough? I mean, she could have had one mansion.
But she's taking care of Black people because she's Black.
Yeah, of course, but still doesn't have one scholarship fund in any inner city area. Still is not even paying for legal battles of people who are claiming to be abused and misaligned and misappropriated.
I don't know if you know this, but I wrote
Matter would be paying for the legal fees for families if this is what they're. That's not even happened one time.
No, I don't know if you were aware of this, but I did an article talking about how Christians had just been duped by Black Lives Matter, and I just went over like the fund. So they pocketed 60 million themselves and said, we're going to grow our organization, which you do need money to grow your organization. I don't know if you need to pocket 60 million of it. And then like they did give some for COVID relief, but most of it they did like what was left of that they gave to 30 different groups, but like I think it was 21 of them were focused on LGBT issues, not even like Black issues.
Trans issues. None of those are Black issues. There's nothing we're fighting for. We ain't fighting for trans issues. The last time I've been to inner cities and working with inner cities for 20 years in ministry, and I haven't heard one person say, Pastor, what are we going to do about trans issues and LGBT issues in our community? I think it's so inflammatory and disrespectful to make gay the new Black. There's never been straight and white water fountains. There's never been fire hoses sprayed at gays. Homosexuals can turn their sexuality on and off. And I love people who are from the homosexual community. I believe God loves them, has a plan for them. But I'm sorry, that's disrespectful. People can't turn their Blackness on and off like you could turn a straight or a feminine behavior, a masculine behavior. Mask it one moment on the job, you're one person. When you're off the job, you're different. When you're Black, you're Black. When you're brown, you're brown. That is so disrespectful that they've been prostituting Black plight and pain for politics. And it's incredible, though. They changed their website. You know that, right? BLM literally wording.
But you know what? What's funny is like I saw their website way back when they first started, and I researched it, and they said something in their language to the regard of like, we're gonna focus more on like a Black trans person because they'll be more disadvantaged than like a straight cis Black male. And I'm like, whoa, they just like basically said right there what their priorities are. So I'm like, okay, this is garbage. And so it was like Obama was still president way back when I looked that up. And so when I saw the What We Believe in page, I was like, obviously the language was different, but it was still the same sentiment. I'm like, they still have this, and they left it up for a very long time. They didn't. People, conservative commentators were talking about it. I was talking about it. I was militant every time I saw hashtag BLM. I'm like, do you know what you're supporting? And then they didn't take it down until there were some more high profile Black celebrities who had researched it and started talking about the importance of family. And so then they eventually took it down. But I couldn't believe how the audacity to have it up for so long.
Well, yeah, it wasn't just, and even when they spoke about family, it was about redefining. I mean, first of all, the Black and brown community, one of the major things that we want is to see stronger marriages. We're hashtagging all over the country, Black love, Black men don't cheat. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Now in that whole entire Black Lives Matter movement, touching $1 billion+ at this point. They don't even have an initiative to say, how do we help single mothers? How do we help men who are straight? See, because there's so much discrimination and bigotry against any they even say heteronormative family structures.
Mm-hmm.
Our communities, that's all you hear about is we want heteronormative, strong men and families who will claim their children and raise them and love Black women and embrace them. And I mean, what are they even talking about? And it's incredible. That's why I do agree with BLM as a concept, but I tell people you can't even hashtag that. It has so been marred. That's like me starting an organization, if I'm Caucasian, saying this is the Christian Klan Club. You can't put Klan in none of that.
Yeah.
So how you going to just use the term Black Lives Matter now is always pointing finances and focus to the organization. It cannot be inextricably separated.
But you know what? But I wouldn't even, I'd like push against that too, because people would tell me I'm supporting the movement, not the organization. But the movement is the concept that police are just going and hunting people. I'm like, and I understand that states they aren't required to necessarily just surrender all data. So no data is going to be perfect. But like, there's people who believe tens of thousands of people are murdered unarmed. And it's just not true. So
people like, Talcum X, aka Sean King, he'd be the first one to say they'll act like we're being lynched daily in the street by law enforcement. But then the narrative switches if it's a Hispanic cop, a Arabic cop, a brown cop, a Black cop. Now it's just police brutality. But if it's any other notion, it's just targeting racially to hunt African American. Which one is it? I mean, statistically, you know all the data and the numbers. What, only 15 to 18 people, half of them were actually armed, shot, and killed in the line of duty by law.
It was the 18 last year, and in 2019 it was 13. But like, and it's funny because there's a chart, and I guess I have it. I'll pull it up really quick.
But crazy though that I like to ask your audience, even though Corona's horrible and bad, but if somebody came forward and said, we are in a national pandemic, why? What are the numbers? 18 people have died from coronavirus among 100. What's the data now for America? 330 million citizens, potentially 400 million living in our nation. Even though we would never want anybody to pass from any sickness or condition, I doubt we would be able to call that a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so you see, the more liberal you are, the more wrong you are on this issue. But even conservatives are kind of wrong too. But look, there's people who believe more than 10,000 people were unarmed and killed by the police, and the number is 13.
Right. But even 10,000 wouldn't even put you on the 0.1 percentile mark based on almost 330 to 400 million U.S. citizens. Even though 10,000 would be horrific, 7,000 to 8,000, and the numbers going up in Chicago are murdered and killed. We just had a young girl who was shot up and killed in McDonald's, and I would not mind to protest that equally if there's true injustice, no matter what it is, but to equally say Black life matters from the womb to the tomb. I tell people all the time, staring down the barrel of a gun, being affected with 80% of fatherlessness in our communities, is not the time to start saying life matters. It's got to begin when we're born with a Black father and a Black mother, or white or Black, because I'm into complete unity ethnically. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But it begins with the foundation of marriage and commitment and family.
Yeah.
And data shows us that when we have that solid foundation, that's when the real value and the mattering and the worth is poured into our children, where they're growing up to be productive citizens, and they could even avoid environments in this great American dream, this exceptional dream of America, and become anything God, especially with God's blessing on their life. No one can stop them. Not no pseudo inflated notions of white supremacy infiltrating every aspect of society, including the air we breathe. It is inducing phobias and fears in the Black and brown community that are going beyond what is, what's even reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to, while we're on the subject of like just false narratives and bad doctrine, I do have this clip of Warnock I want to play, and I want to get sorry you have to watch him, but I want to play this and see what you think of this.
Good afternoon, welcome. What you refer to the church, and I realize that there are many different churches, but what would you say is the church's relationship today with the Nation of Islam and the Islamic movement that has a growing number of African American members? And perhaps as part of that, can you discuss whether the Black church is having the same type of attendance problems that the so-called mainstream white churches and synagogues are having, and if so, why or why not?
Well, the Nation of Islam is significant, but its numbers don't come anywhere near the membership of our churches. Its voice has been important, and its voice has been important even for the development of black theology. Because it was the black Muslims who challenged black preachers and said that you're promulgating, they call the white man's religion. And that's a slave religion. You're telling people to focus on heaven, meanwhile they're catching hell. And so we've needed the witness of the Nation of Islam in a real sense to put a fire under us and keep us honest about the meaning of the proclamation coming from our pulpits. Mainline Protestantism has been in decline now for decades. On the other hand, a number of our churches are growing. And I could talk a long time about that, but a number of our churches are growing. Very often, the issue is our willingness, I think, to respond, to be flexible in terms of methodology, to be attentive to the waves in the culture, and yet at the same time not concede to the materialism, the narcissism, the nihilism. How is it that we can have a liberationist message and still not be roadkill in cyberspace? Understanding what Facebook is and Twitter, as Robert Michael Franklin talked about on yesterday. So I think that many of our churches that have a liberationist focus sometimes don't have the hearing that they ought to have because they haven't been as savvy where media and some other things are concerned. So I've tried in my own church to bridge that conversation.
Okay.
First of all, have you ever heard any arbitrary nothing burger word salad in your life?
I watch a lot of politics, so I'm afraid that I've heard more, but
You need all over the place. You need some coffee and a good nap.
well, I guess what I wanted to zone in is the because some people, I saw some liberals like, what did you say that was wrong? I'm like, that they're saying the problem is that the Muslims were challenging the Christians, like that's the white man's religion and all. It's like, dude, like I hear people say like, Jesus is brown. We need to tell people that Jesus is brown to end racism, but then they tell me it's a white man's religion. I'm really, I don't know what they want from me.
I'm studying in process toward my doctorate right now, and I'm gonna tell you right now, Christianity was in Africa 600 to 700, some estimate even longer, in Africa and Ethiopia and other parts of Africa, long before white Europeans even embraced it. It didn't even reach that area of the world. Asia, written on 3 continents, Asia, Africa. This literally solid theology, systematic theology will show you that Asia and Africa, and then portions of Europe, were the predominance where it came from, were centers of color around the world. They were not from the Caucasus Mountains where people were lily white. People invent this stuff. It's incredible. It's easy to debunk. So, this notion of white Christianity, and I understand, and one thing I will tell people is that if you go to all countries from Africa, I've been to the Philippines preaching, in Asia, people have depicted imagery of Jesus that seem to identify with their particular ethnicities. But I think, sure, that's nothing wrong with that, but I think what ends up happening is we make images, and the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, said you would make no graven image. And I think one of the reasons God may have implied that is because he knew people would try to create God into their own ethnicity and maybe mar the inclusiveness of God's love to all ethnic origins, countries, and continents and cultures. So
Mm-hmm.
that's false to say that's just done by Caucasians in the beginning. And then think about this: when we're dealing with slavery, we're dealing with things in the past of oppression, and the predominant imagery and people who are politicians and senators and artists and Renaissance periods and all of that, they're going to do the very same thing we do. I can't tell you countless black churches I go to, and there's pictures of black Jesus on the wall and walking on the Sea of Galilee and all of that. And I don't think it's wrong and evil, but if that's cultural appropriation of Christianity, that's equal to anything we've seen in white America if we want to really scrub that influence and be more neutral and be more balanced. So, I mean, that's just something that's incredible to me. Islam has never had no history in the African American church. There's never been no merging where it's almost like a Chrislam between the Nation of Islam. The historical black church has seen the Nation of Islam for what it is. It is a cult. It's not even accepted by Farsi speaking Middle Eastern Islam because there is vestiges of racism in Arabic speaking countries. And one of the pioneers of black enslavement, not slavery period, but black enslavement, started in Islam.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had a big. I mean, people talk about American slave trade, but I mean,
Oh, the sub-Saharan slave trade, all these. Let me tell you something. There's no comparison. Only
mm-hmm.
what 3% of how many people were abducted from Africa and all different parts of the world even made it to the Americas. There's some estimate that's 300 to 400,000 at that time. That's a lot of people. But people, we kind of think it was like 50, 60, 70, 80 million. And then on top of that, only 20% to 24% of the wealthy elites, that would be like the politicians of the day, the entertainers from Hollywood today, had enough money to even own plantations and buy bodies of slaves, which could be in the thousands per body in American currency. The currency probably even worth more than that when you really take into consideration inflation. We're thinking every American was owning slaves, and there were multiple whites who were equally being lynched and killed and pioneers. They pioneered the civil rights movement. White people in America in the beginning, the anti-slavery efforts that came from Europe. You know, Dr. David Barton does an amazing job of documenting this unbiased history in this book, The American Story. So don't get me on a soapbox, but
No, I hate it when I was on TikTok and I did a rant about these people were like burn down everything, blah blah blah, because it won't erase the debt or equal the debt. And I'm just like, nobody owes you anything. America doesn't owe you anything. If you want to talk about debts, the Civil War happened. A lot of people died fighting in that war. If you want to talk about that debt, but nobody owes you anything today. Like everyone who suffered that died. And so someone commented and was like, "Do you really believe America loves you?" I'm just like, and it's funny because all these people watching my videos are like, we love her. But I'm just like, why do you people need strangers to love you? I got Jesus.
that's
I
right.
got my family and my friends.
Christ. And let me tell you, I was in inner city environments selling weed, smoking, fighting, doing things where I could have been a product of my environment. But when I gave my heart to Jesus, it wasn't overnight. I renounced womanizing, seeing women as walking sexual objects, abusing drugs, violence, fighting. And let me tell you, a lot of people in our community, no matter what their skin color, I don't care how brown you are, how light skinned you are, the Bible says the way of the transgressor is hard, and many people do not want God's help. They believe they can social justice it all the way to equity and these force of law and legislation. And a lot of it was needed in the past, but their mindset today is they are God. We don't need God's intervention or to transform our personal character. We will just try to use government in a totalitarian fashion to push our
Men are lovers of themselves rather than being lovers of God.
And how about this, Christina? When half of the country, let's just say half of the entire country, was willing to go to war and die to free African Americans, predominantly, and remember, the people in power were all Caucasians at that time. If you were not a Caucasian, you were enslaved. We're talking about when this thing really started kicking off, it was almost predominantly all Caucasian people. And when half of the country is willing to get shot with muskets and die, some estimate over 400,000 white people died in the Civil War fighting for Black freedom. Extrapolate that today based on population numbers. Who knows how high that percentage was? Saying, watch this, that Black life was worth dying for.
Yeah.
Valuable enough and it mattered.
There'll be, I mean, there's people who say that's revisionist history, but what people don't understand, yeah, there's a lot, there was keeping the country together. There are states' rights. There are immigrants coming in, they're like handing them a gun as soon as they got off the boat. Yeah, that's true. But as the war kept progressing, people really, and it got so violent, people really needed it to be worth more. And then people, there are abolitionists that were preaching who came out of like the Great Awakenings, who preached, that slavery is wrong. And then you had people like P.T. Barnum, who showed like Uncle Tom's Cabin, like those plays that he would have. He used to be a Democrat, he became a Republican. They started having these plays, and people would come and watch them, and they would see the plight of the and grow more sympathetic toward the slaves. And so it prepared the country more to finish the fight. But if Abraham Lincoln had not won his reelection, the Democrats, the person they put up was a general who could not beat Robert E. Lee. They nominated a failure, and if they had won, they were going to make a deal, and they were going to end the war without winning the war. So everything was on the line for victory, for freedom. So not everybody was in it for a particular reason, but let's not pretend that it didn't basically become this.
Sure.
So
and it's amazing, people don't realize that Uncle Tom and his playwrights and the things he did broke open bastions of in the North and other areas of strongholds of slavery, where people stood up enough to say, we need to change some things. So while we're using his name as a pejorative, it broke open some of the hardest areas in the nation where certain white contingencies were still holding to racist views. And this, now his name is being held in infamy when he was really used to fight racism more than people who are just posting memes on social media today. I mean, people, they have, the historical revisionism is one of the main things that's attacking the Black and brown community. And it's robbing us with the 1619 Project, false foundations of how America was purportedly established for slavery, and multiple angles. The 3/5 clause, people don't really know the truth even behind that.
yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I do want to get back to this the Georgia law a little bit, but before I do that, I want to play you this one video and ask you a question.
Come on, let's do it. This is awesome.
Our rescue plan also includes immediate relief to Americans hardest hit and most in need. We will finish the job of getting a total of $2,000 in cash relief to people who need it the most.
We will be able to pass $2,000 stimulus checks for the people next week when we win these races in Georgia.
We need to pass the $2,000 stimulus package.
One of the first things that I want to do when our new senators are seated is deliver the $2,000 checks to the American families.
So my question is,
I just have to laugh at that. Jesus, man. And they're almost reading from the same teleprompting script. It's unbelievable.
Are you still old? Is it $600? Is it because they paid 14, right? So are you still owed $600? Is my question.
I'm not great on my math. I'm not sure. It's 600 or 400, close to 1,200. Please forgive me. I didn't do well with math. Coming up and.
What's crazy to me is that they're like, no, it was a down payment. I'm like, how did Trump pay on a down payment when he made a whole new promise? Like, it doesn't even make any sense. Like, Trump paid, and then they're like, oh, that was the down payment. No, it wasn't. Like, a whole different man in a whole different administration, whole different inauguration, and all this other stuff. Like,
you know what's crazy to me, Christina, is that for all the negatives that people did not appreciate about our previous president, to which I applaud so many of the great achievements that he did, despite a leftist monopolized media that was out to destroy him. And he spanked them often, and they deserved it for journalistic malfeasance. There's laws against some of the things that you eat, despite freedom of the press. Journalistic malfeasance and slander and things you can be sued over is real. And they were doing it with impunity with the previous president. But I'm gonna tell you what, when he was doing opportunity zones, economic zones, all of those things, pouring billions into the inner cities, that was way, way of a better strategy than giving people $600 a pocket. And it's incredible. And then he did something that was never done. He actually helped businesses that if they couldn't stay afloat 3 or 4 months of floating their salaries for their employees and small businesses, and just so many different things. It's amazing how we had literally sold our soul for pennies, and for the the false security of people saying what we want them to hear racially, but really betraying Black and brown interests for what really matters to us in policy, public policy.
I've heard people tell me that Joe Biden lifted us up out of poverty. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I know that was their talking point, and I know they put that out in their press release. But like, I can't believe people are repeating it. I'm like, how broke are you that you're lifting people out of poverty?
Theologically, the leaks of Egypt. You remember when God brought them out? He's like, look, I'm about to give y'all your own real estate. I'm paraphrasing. I'm about to bring you the land you didn't build and vineyards you didn't plant. And man, I got a whole nation here, geography for you. The garden's already built and done. And how many times, because it was hard to walk and push past victimization and a broken heart, slave-minded mentality, how many times did they say, we want to go back to Egypt where we lived for free, we ate onions, melons, and leeks freely. They were so codependent on the Egyptian government. God was like, I'm about to give y'all reparations. I'm about to give y'all land and real estate. And like, we don't want to have to work and till the land and all that. Just you know, we just want to go back to Egypt. We want to go back to the way. And born again brown Christians better realize that that's the typology in the Old Covenant. And you can see it even in the New Testament. Y'all can't juxtapose that and lay that template on what we're watching in culture and not see that this is the same fallen Egyptian mentality. We need an African American awakening. We need Black and brown believers to wake up.
I essentially said that to Lecrae said something about he was coming against these white evangelicals that keep telling people to kind of not talk about all this race stuff, and he basically compared them to people who try to keep slaves down or whatever, or people in slavery by interpreting the Bible their way. And so I did mention that kind of as a clapback, like God had to let some people die in Egypt because he couldn't shed their slave mentality. And so we just need to get back to preaching the gospel. It's like the only sin you guys can't forgive is racism.
Well, you know, racism is the unpardonable sin, because with critical race theorists, man, let me tell you, Christina, we are literally allowing the Robin DiAngelos and these fallen, unregenerate secularists lead the narrative on race, when the church has been the epicenter of true spiritual and biblical liberation. The church birthed the civil rights. The church birthed the abolitionist movement. The church birthed the fight against Jim Crow and the overturning of Dred Scott. The church and caused segregation to be overturned. The church has done that. But many people in the world and many saints are being so indoctrinated by the emotionalism of the unredeemed and the sentiment of sinners when it comes to this conversation culturally, that they're not listening to their pastors. They're no longer even trying to filter what they believe about race and economics and you know, marriage and family through the Bible. But they clap and two-step and run around the building on Sunday and think they're all good with the Lord. I say you can love God, what God loves, and not hate what he hates. And you can't say I love God, but love what God hates.
Exactly. What did you think? I'm sure you saw this when Warnock tweeted out on Easter, the meaning of Easter is more transcendent than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Whether you are Christian or not, through a commitment to helping others, we are able to save ourselves.
Let me tell you something. I was part of a movement of Black and brown pastors in the city who were opposing him to even be qualified for the Senate. He has a huge homeless community in front of his church. I was sitting on millions of dollars using the fame of MLK's notoriety, really not even embodying the ethos and the heart of what he had. And let me tell you something, he can't even get the orthodoxy of the resurrection correct. And then he even said in that tweet, sometimes, like you just said, save ourselves. Listen, if you are a solid fivefold leader, you don't put save yourself in the same sentence with the resurrection.
Or say that there's something more transcendent.
Right. More transcendent, save yourself. That literally is secular humanism that is tainting his theology. He's not even qualified to be a pastor, let alone a politician. I mean, listen, I tell people all the time, if he can't even get the notion of why Jesus rose from the dead, why are we shocked that he is not getting the definition of life biblically correctly? You know, when the scripture is replete, he's the first Black pastor to go down shamefully, in my opinion, to step into a political position and say that abortion, child infanticide is healthcare, and consistent with his Christian faith.
No.
Can we at least be honest and say, hey, you know what? I just believe in separation of church and state. I may not agree with it, but it's definitely not in the Bible, but you can't just push that in public policy.
That's not even what separation of church and state means, but I get you, but man, no, it's crazy. And you know what? And people who are so adamant about separating church and state and all that other stuff and use the term incorrectly, but it's like people have their own sense of morality that they use to influence their decisions politically all the time. Like when people say, we should do minimum wage, we should have this wage, because even though they know it'll destroy small business, even though it's actually based in eugenics,
That's right.
they're like, this is what we deserve, this is what's, it's a human right, all this other, like, who said that?
Mm-hmm.
Who said that? Who decided that? Who decided that we have to destroy private health insurance just so you can have free healthcare, but nothing is free? If you believe healthcare should be free, are you saying nurses and doctors shouldn't be paid? No, you're not saying that. You're saying you don't want to pay the bill.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
So-
and the last thing I saw in the Black community healthcare is like, hey, bring these pharmaceuticals and these prescription numbers down, which the previous president did.
Yeah.
A lot of that was revoked. People don't want to talk about that and won't put it on the news.
Oh, people are tweeting, why is my insulin so high?
There's many things that we need and we're asking for. And once again, this secular liberalist agenda put abortion as some top healthcare need. It's just been getting worse, more and more radicalized. I did an entire op-ed that I'm going to republish. And I did challenge Warnock to a public debate. He declined. And I wrote an entire piece where I systemically walked from Genesis to Revelation on the biblical premise for why infanticide is anti-Christian and anti-biblical. And I mean, let me tell you something. This is basic. He's not qualified for that. And we're hoping when the Senate race comes around full circle that we vote him out. He doesn't represent the Black community where 70-80% are consider themselves Christian conservatives. He doesn't even have a balanced viewpoint with economics. He's just not the man.
Well, I'm hoping that there will be a turnaround and a backlash, especially after MLB pulled out, and because of them pulling out over nonsense. And you can't say it wasn't because of the political pressure, because it's obvious that it was. And I mean, they even listed the president in their statement when they decided to do it. I saw Jake Tapper had a tweet, and he's like, well, what people don't understand is if they didn't just pull out, then all these players would have been asked continuously whether they're going to pull out. And everyone's just kind of like, you're the media, Jake. Who would have kept asking them? Who would have bothered them? Who would have pressured them? It would have been you guys doing that. So you're just admitting that you and your colleagues are trash.
Trash. and all of them doing this race baiting for ratings. They don't care about Black interests. And even if they're not racist, most cultures are consumed with their own constituencies, and they want to pose with this false uncivil rights. I tell people all the time, when something is no longer right, it can't be civil.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this: Have you run into people personally that believe that the Georgia law was just super oppressive, or do you guys have a conversation? And you're like, no, it's not that bad. Like, what's your experience on the ground?
Well, let me tell you something right now. I actually sat in the meeting with the governor. We went over the legislation with Black clergy and civic leaders. We were pretty bold. We were invited there because we're influencers, and we said, well, this is why people are accusing me of racism and so on and so forth. And he laid that thing out, showed us evidence where he sat down with entrepreneurs in Atlanta and the city, showed them about the election integrity. There is nothing new. I mean, for example, Joe Biden and Stacey Abrams are emphatically lying about the bill. And if most Americans would actually do their research and study, they would know that they're saying the new law restricts early voting, when the truth is the law expands early voting hours and additional weekend voting opportunities, including Sunday. They're saying voter ID requirements are racially discriminatory, but IDs are necessary for numerous everyday activities, from going to package stores to getting on planes and utility bills. Oh, man. And then in Georgia, what most people don't know, Christina, is that you don't pay for an ID for voting purposes. I don't know how many states have this, but you can go to your state and get an ID for voting and you don't have to pay a dime. So how's that very discriminatory? Another one, restrictions on distributing food and water to voters are intended to make voting more uncomfortable for minority voters. when the truth is the law only prohibits using free food and beverages as a form of electioneering, and it does not stop electoral legislators to provide their own beverages and water. And one of the things that he actually did, which helps the Black community, is it allows takeovers. They're claiming it allows takeovers of local election administration when the law is really protecting voters when local officials fail to prevent excessive lines or struggle to process absentee ballots. In other words, in Black communities, they're complaining it's so long and the lines are so long. This is the white man somehow circumventing and using racism to make us just be so tired that we leave and we don't want to vote. And it's amazing the one-sided narrative is that these are in predominantly leftist Democrat in leadership in inner cities. He's saying we will turn it back over to the electoral legislators where the people, not the governor or anyone in the state, the local electors to be able to reassess that, get multiple precincts in areas when before in Democrat stronghold inner cities, they ran the show.
Yeah.
And put the pressure on the people to keep them always on edge. I'm in and out of the inner city. I'm telling you right now, a lot of that was not happening in downtown LA. There were certain areas, but that was not the truth. He's actually putting the power back in predominantly Black communities to say you can pull people out who are not causing your wait times to be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, moving seamlessly and fluidly. And what people don't realize too, any of these laws affect as many whites across the state as it would African Americans, Asians, Latinos. How could this be pointing and targeting African Americans when it's affecting all of the same people who live in the city? There's so many pieces missing there. It's just, it's fraudulent. It's literally mendacious.
Well, someone commented on my TikTok. They're like, well, they did any reason absentee. So if people want to wait in lines, that's because they made that decision. I'm like, I guess that's a good point. But I'm like, in Michigan, we have one day. Like, I understand in Georgia, y'all have like some lines and stuff. But my thing is just like, I actually think the law is too generous, personally.
It is. In electioneering, you're not even supposed to get within a certain distance of people where you're giving them beverages and snacks with.
And I think that's true about every state. Like,
trying to influence them.
These comments about food and water, I'm like, when I heard that, I'm just like, y'all get food and water when y'all vote. Like I've never.
It's like freebies. Why is it in our community people want to give us these cheapy 20-cent bottles of water with certain candidates wrapped around it? You're trying to manipulate. That's actually against the law already. It's called electioneering. And what whites, Blacks, Hispanics all have to honor laws, election laws, especially like electioneering, what you just said. One of the accusations in Georgia was restrictions on distributing food and water to voters. The new law eliminates absentee ballot drop boxes, when the truth is this: drop boxes never existed before the pandemic, and the new law creates rules to keep them and the ballots inside secure. No tampering, no moving, no dropping things off, especially in the time of COVID. People need to understand. Let me say this. I'm not going to get into conspiratorial theories, but do you know over 46 states, now it's rising, have passed election integrity laws in the very areas, Christina, where conservatives were called QAnon and you're making things up. This was the most secure election in American history yet. All the concerns about dropping off ballots, absentee ballots, no signature verification, Secretary of State's activist judges trying to overturn the will of the electorate and the legislature. All of those loopholes are being addressed in election integrity laws, which says to me, if you got to create something to stop the loopholes, were they really conspiracy theories, or were these persons truly being engaged? That's all I'm gonna say about that.
But you know what? And people kept asking, like, why the timing? Why the timing? Like, look, we had an extraordinary election last year, and it didn't run smoothly. I'm sorry. Like, the count in the middle of the night, it was driving me crazy. I didn't like that. Stopping the count and the vote, that wasn't cool. But we didn't have a smooth outcome. But there were so many things that they did because of the pandemic, like the drop boxes. It makes total sense that you'd try to put things and measures in place to keep these things more secure. If you want to keep them, I wouldn't keep drop boxes, but you guys decided to keep them, so why not make it more secure? And so that's why I try to explain to people. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, if you think this timing is suspicious, but by the way, Republicans always want people to show ID. I go to Republican conventions. I've had to give out credentials. I don't care if I'm looking at you dead in your eye and I recognize you. If you don't have your ID, you better go back to the car and you better get it. Like, we are just very serious about it. And Democrats do the same thing at their conventions too. So the voter ID thing is just garbage. But
well, they went into inner cities and many conservative outlets, and even people who are libertarian and even conservatives were interviewing African Americans and, you know, regular everyday people, not these false communities. I'm gonna tell you what. The real racial insensitivities and the typecasting is coming from the liberal left, because
white liberals,
they're presenting that African Americans don't really care about integrity. We don't care about laws. We don't care about compliance. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to paint this picture through soft bigotry. And you're going to paint this notion that this is what Black people want, and this is what Latinos want, and the community of color want. And then non-Black people are watching your lips move, and all you talk about is immorality, and you're saying this is what we want in our community. Who would not look at our community and say, man, what's wrong with the Black and brown community? Like that, it's like they're not thinking about these issues. And let me tell you, that is not what the Black and brown community and the Latino community espouse with marriage and sexuality and family and children. And choice. Let me tell you something right now. School choice. Excuse me. You gotta be clear. We don't want to see that stuff, and it's creating soft bigotry where we can't have IDs, but we use them to go to package stores, get liquor. I'm not saying all people of color. I'm just being facetious. Yeah. You got to use that for the most basic stuff. You know, even when they shifted the MLB to where to that state, I think it was Colorado. They already had election integrity laws that mirror what Atlanta was trying to do with ID. I mean, it's total hypocrisy.
No, to be honest, I don't think there's probably like a huge number of people voting without IDs that there's some kind of like fraud in that area. But you don't leave cracks in your system. Just like in retail, they would tell you if you're in order to stop theft is to provide the best customer service. Basically, don't give people the opportunity to be alone so they can just think about it and say, maybe no one's watching, maybe I should steal this flash drive. And then all of a sudden they're addicted because they know they can get away with it. You have to be on people. Don't provide the opportunity to commit crimes.
Absolutely. I'm a 100% agreement with you. And it's so sad that when we're doing what we're doing, people like you, because we love the Black and brown community. And sorry, we're not coons. We equally love the white community.
Mm-hmm.
Be anti-racist and look at the treatment of Caucasian or white people and say, no, we want to model what inclusion and real love and acceptance looks like. And the things that happened to us in the past, we're not cool, especially as Black and brown Christians, with that happening to white brothers and sisters. Because if we hate it and it's wrong, it's got to be wrong across the board.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying all that to say is that, you know, we're standing and saying what we're saying because we love our communities. We want our community to realize that without God, His blessing, without inward transformation through the gospel of Jesus Christ, you're not going to find the blessing of the Lord. And the Bible says, if God is for you, who can be against you? And guess what? That would include white supremacy. That would include people blocking you from being an entrepreneur, from certain opportunities. You and God would be a majority. And if our ancestors did it in times of real Jim Crow and threats of lynching and death and slavery, and they became millionaires and entrepreneurs and built Black Wall Street and did all these things, don't tell me it's worse today than in slavery days and in the Jim Crow South. That's almost as disrespectful as saying gay is the new black.
Yeah. Well, I want to, since you mentioned that, I do want to play this clip from Representative Owens from Texas, who was testifying in Congress about the HR 1 bill. And you have Joe Biden say that these laws people are passing is a new Jim Crow. It makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle, whatever that means. And
what
then
mean? Jesus, man.
I don't know.
We're smoking recreational marijuana.
And then you have Warnock, who basically said the same thing, and he was sent there to and he wouldn't talk about the specifics of really why the law was oppressive, but he did call it Jim Crow. And like I said, Black mayors in my state, my particular mayor is saying that too, Jim Crow 2.0, but he's going to actually talk about how he actually did grow up in that era. So here he is.
Wow.
I grew up in the era of actual legalized institutional racism. I grew up in the Deep South in Tallahassee, Florida, in the 1960s during the days of KKK, Jim Crow, and segregation. My first experience with white Americans was at 16 years old. At 18, I was the third black athlete to receive a scholarship to play football at the University of Miami. Now I proudly represent Utah's 4th Congressional District in the U.S. Congress. I sit today before you as someone who's lived the American dream, as have millions of other Americans of all races from every background. This is due to our country's mission statement that all men and women are created equal. A mission statement that every American should have the equal opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as someone who's actually experienced Jim Crow laws, I'd like to set the record straight on the myth regarding the recently passed Georgia state law, and why any comparison between this law and Jim Crow is absolutely outrageous. Here are a few examples of my own life of what Jim Crow laws actually look like. At the age of 12, my father allowed me to participate in a demonstration with college students in front of the segregated Florida State Theater, where because of our color, we could not enter. I was the youngest participant there. Only 50 years later did I learn that my father had parked across the street to watch and make sure I was safe. In the 7th grade, my school never received new books. Instead, we received books from the all-white school across town. At service stations, there were white men-only restrooms, white women-only restrooms, and a filthy restroom in the back of the station for black Americans designated as colored. In addition, Jim Crow laws like poll tax, property tests, literacy tests, and violence and intimidation at the polls made it nearly impossible for black Americans to vote. The section of the Georgia law that has brought so much outrage from the left it simply requires any person applying for absentee ballot to include evidence of a government-issued ID on their application.
Yeah, so that's a big thing with the ID. And you know what? Some people are like, you just don't want some people to vote. I'm like, yeah, I don't want people who can't prove that they're U.S. citizens to vote. You got me.
Well, here's the thing too. If you are saying, you know, these whoever groups, they love to try to marginalize and try to typecast and throw everybody into some right-wing box of extremism. See, conservatism is not even a political party; it's a philosophy and a worldview. So now for them to try to say, you know, with this entire election situation, I lost my thought. I was going to say something specific. We were saying there's like. All of this, if they beat us fair and square, that's what I was going to say. If they beat us fair and square with solid election integrity, why are the secular leftists and Democrats making such a huge intentional triggering of our community, always employing the dead one-trick pony of racism, if they did not have no problems with verifying signatures, have no problem with dropping ballots and absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, and all of that was the most securest election in history. Why are they fighting so hard and trying to trigger the entire community of color? They're almost proving that they realize they can't win fair and square, and that's what they're making it look like. Maybe they did in their mind, but I'm going to tell you what: when you are pushing this hard on accountability and election transparency, it says to me, it adds fuel and fodder to the distrust of Americans that you were operating above and board regarding election integrity.
But you know what? The I guess even a better question would be like, because people talk about the timing of the Georgia law, but it's like, okay, well, why are you guys trying to pass HR 1? And have all the, so basically they're trying to take over a lot of our localized elections, right. and they believe, I guess, if they can do that, then they can keep having their guys in power, and Republicans or whoever, unless it's like a Republican that's kind of more toward their side, will keep pushing things that they want. But I don't understand, and we should not vote for anyone for Congress, for Senate, for governor, for, like, my Secretary of State went there to Congress to advocate for the HR 1 bill. We should not support anyone who tries to surrender power from our local government to give it to the federal government. No one. Like,
literally, poster child. That is literally the quintessential definition of being unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
States have power. The Fed has their power. There is a separation of powers for checks and balances. I mean, this is basic. Even if you like Trump and you fell for that media rhetoric that was constantly twisting things left and right. It's amazing all the fact checkers, they proves that the media fought so hard to say rumors and things were true. And now any small thing today is they're constantly trying to defend who they want in power.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to me that even if you didn't like him, you should want transparency in your elections. You should want things verified, because what if Republicans are secretly cheating? I mean, let's theoretically say they're doing a lot and you don't even know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
None of this is going to backfire on just Democrats. It will affect any independent candidates, any libertarians, Green Party. But see, that in the
That's why it's important to advocate for limited government. Like, people believe that Trump was a tyrant. That's what kills me about the guns. Like, it's stupid for you guys to want to have guns, because it's to think that you can overthrow the government, or that like that'll happen. I'm like, you guys thought Trump was Orange Hitler, and you think it's silly for me to want to have guns to fight the government in case like they get too tyrannical? It doesn't even make any sense at all. But I think back to the HR1 bill. Talking about the election integrity, and obviously Democrats like the result that they had, and they want to make sure that they keep having it. And so if you recall back to 2016, way back when Trump was running for president, and they asked Obama what he thought about saying it's a rigged election. I'm going to play this clip because I think it's really telling. And I hate to show you Obama. But I think it's really telling and indicative of what the plan is today.
Repeatedly now, Donald Trump has said that this election will be rigged against him. Can you promise the American people that this election will be conducted in a fair way?
It is. I don't even really know where to start on answering this question. Of course, the elections will not be rigged. What does that mean? The federal government doesn't run the election process. States and cities and communities all across the country, they're the ones who set up the voting systems and the voting booths. And if Mr. Trump is suggesting that there is a conspiracy theory that is being propagated across the country, including in places like Texas, where typically it's not Democrats who are in charge of voting booths. That's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. And I don't think.
So why are they trying to make elections not local? And why are they trying to give that power back to the federal government? Or not back to, but transfer it in an unconstitutional way to the federal government, which would make it more easier to cheat.
Right. And he made it like a laughable conspiracy, but we are literally looking at legislation from, coincidentally, his party that wants to take the separation of powers with election legislators in the state level and transfer that power to the federal government. That is the constant. He laughed in that clip and said,
because it was stupid to think that someone could rig it that way. And Trump, I believe he was saying it's rigging because of how he was treated, because of the media, not that they're going to actually like stuff the ballots or something like that. I don't think that's what he was alleging, but Obama was just saying it's stupid to think that someone could fix the election like that because it's so decentralized. We have so many different rules. Like, you guys have multiple days. We just have it one day in Michigan. You can't control it like that, but they want to be able to control it because they want to be able to control the outcome.
Not one day. You literally have 20 plus days. You're legally, no employer can tell you can't get off your job to go vote. You actually can do early voting, where even if it's not an organized area and you're personally organized, which I always do, is early voting, I'm never in line. I mean, I literally went through where I couldn't walk certain distances because I was recovering from an injury, and I was able to get in and out of there because I went in early. A lot of this is false conjecture, and it's incredible to me how Americans, and my focal audience is born again, black and brown and white, born again Christians who are supposed to have the Spirit of God that helps you discern, lead you and guide you into all truth. Wouldn't that include politics, elections, who's lying, truth, the filter of the Word of God? And they're equally being deceived and duped by this. And I agree with you. I think the president, when you look at James O'Keefe and you look at the Veritas projects, where they're showing you top CEOs and the top executives of CNN saying we did it. When New York Times comes out braggadociously, putting a front page op-ed that, yes, the media came together and we had to do what we did. I'm paraphrasing, to save democracy.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the media lied, and you have actual footage and videos, but you get black and brown people who are so married to this false loyalty to this Democrat Party and don't realize these are all the same people. They're telling you they lied. They bragged after elections. They're putting it on, and we have these watering holes where we worship CNN, worship these news outlets, and that's why the black and brown community is so deceived, because all they do is look at leftist leaning material and they won't even check the other side and pray to make sure, well, let me see, is there a balance to this?
Yeah, but even before the election, the head of the New York Times, he was like having a meeting or something with was people, and they're like, after the Russia investigation, which obviously all that stuff did not pan out for them, they're like, now we're going to focus on race. And not too long afterwards, guess what came out? The 1619 Project. So much stuff that was inflamed with race was supposed to be like, Trump was supposed to be the face of racism, and America is evil. And if you elect him, you're just supporting evil. So you have to please vote for this segregationist who's 78 years old, who locked up your black and brown children.
Right. She won multiple Pulitzer Prizes, even though that like 1776unites.com has a bunch of black and white historians with doctorates who are debunking historical revisionism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have Bob Woodson, so on and so forth, these amazing historians, the Thomas Sowell's historians, telling you this is fabricated. This is not American history. We're not even denying slavery and abuses and things. We're just telling you that's not why America was founded. It's not true.
Yeah.
And the woman still gets Pulitzer Prizes. She's still being lauded. 1619 Project is complete farce and fabricated. But it's like, our community, do you really want truth? And if you're a born again black and brown Christian and a white Christian with compassion, do you not want truth, or is that going to be sacrificed on the altar of convenience? Because you're going to have to stand and fight. You're going to have to get some pushback. You might get some persecution. But if you love God, you love the country he's assigned you to, then you can't just have a cute, comfortable life. You got to take stands and speak the truth.
Yeah. And then it just also bothered me that so many people don't know their history. Like I have a religious podcast I do too called Project 31. And I did an episode like just laying out the foundation of just how America was founded on revival. Mm-hmm. And it just kills me that people think that it's just rooted in racism. They're trying to rewrite history. I'm like, think about how God had to move to inspire people to come to a land so they could have religious liberty, and how God inspired people to preach for the colonies when to come together. Mm-hmm. and they had to preach, and God inspired revival so people would preach that racism is wrong, that slavery is wrong. And you had like people like Pastor Rankin, it was John Rankin, who's in Ohio. He preached so tough in the little town of Ripley that it became like a great point that people come in the Underground Railroad to freedom. And so people don't understand the history. I mean, Harriet Tubman, such a woman to God who just loved the Lord. I mean, God inspired so much to free people, and they think it's just the white man's religion.
Where I am, I'm not even far in Georgia from protected lands that you can't even buy or build on, because it is literally pieces of the Underground Railroad. It's incredible. Yeah.
Well, we got some praying to do for America, and I hope we got like a big revival coming. I mean, we got to pray for that to happen. But people need to learn, people need to study, and people need to break out of the narrative. That's one reason why I do what I do, and I appreciate what you do. And I'm so happy that you came on today, especially someone on the ground in Georgia.
I'm honored to be here, and I commend you too. I'm very proud of what you're doing, taking a stand for truth. And we need more powerful women of God, especially black and brown women of God, who can articulate the issues with being cordial, respectful, but still being, facts don't care about your feelings, and telling the truth and saying what it is, and even referencing back to the Word of God. Pray for me. I'm going to start a podcast here soon, because I preach and do a lot of things and a lot of interviews, but I'm going to do one too where I can tie civics into Christian worldview to help the community of color. And, our organization, C3 Conservative Clergy Color, we literally are doing that. We're showing the world through media that there are black and brown and Latino leaders, and soon white leaders in our organization, and we don't agree with the one-sided narrative shared in the public. The Word of God says something different. History has told us something different. And we're attacking hopelessness. America is not what it used to be. It's not perfect, but we have evolved. We have crucified and killed a lot of our demons. And really, it's sinners and wicked people that when Christians stay out of politics, stay out of civics, the vacuum is absorbed by the wicked in the upper echelons and positions of power. And that is part of our problem. It's not just that we're preaching the gospel and need to do better with that. We also need to accept civic engagement and biblical citizenship to care for the country that we've been assigned to. Now, if you love God and country, you're considered a nationalist. When the truth is, what's so terrible is you look at Satanists and secularists, you look at humanists, they're not happy with their message just being in one sector and sphere of influence. They're championing in the mountain of media, entrepreneurship. You can see with this corporate big tech censorship, they're getting in every sphere of influence and they're championing their message. So what's the term that we call them? And for Christians trying to do it, we're nationalists. They're totalitarians is what they are. They're autocrats. And that's the designation they fall into.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna start to sign off, and hopefully it'll be the closing that like the 5 closings that we're like notorious for. But Mr. Wilberforce, who fought so hard in England to get rid of slavery, he was told by the man who wrote Amazing Grace, used to be a slave ship captain, who God delivered and set free. He told him, because Wilberforce was discouraged about he was thinking, should I be into politics or should I pursue the gospel? And he's like, how do you know that you're not like Esther, where God has called you for such a time as this? So there's a lot of people who don't want to be engaged and want to stay in their own corner, and I understand that. But how do you know that God isn't using you for this time to reach people and not in political, like, no one's going to be saved by politics, but everyone's going to be saved by the gospel. But we're not going to transform our country if we're not preaching the gospel, and then it changes people's morality on situations like abortion and all these other things. I don't like it, but until we don't respect each other's humanity today.
That's right.
And that's really the problem. So if the church isn't engaged and trying to change hearts and minds on this issue, then we're just going to have these wackadoodles out in the world and they're still going to bring their morality, but it's going to be rooted in something really sinister and humanistic, but not the gospel. That's just totally the opposite. Right. And we're going to keep seeing Marxism build until this isn't the America that we've known and loved and benefited from.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you right now, what you're saying is so true, and it is so necessary and so needed. We need more people saying this. And I even encourage our white brothers and sisters. I know people are automatically making you whiteness synonymous with oppression. We need your voices as white Christians, white believers, and we are holding hands and standing together as a colorful and colorless church as it pertains to truth, and saying we are united as one through the blood of Jesus, and we are going to push back on lies and push back on deception. And so it's time for Christians to mobilize. It's the time for Josephs. It's the time for Daniels. It's the time for Esther's. There are 4 books to deal with leaders in political position, whether they're wicked or righteous. And God encourages us to be righteous in positions of civic responsibility. It's called 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. It's all through the word of God. And the Lord gave me a word, and just my last point, and whatever you want to do, but the Lord said he's raising up judges in America. We're living in Judges chapter 1 and Judges chapter 2 as a prophetic timeline, where God did not just wrap the deliverance of Israel in a spiritual and civic leader in Joshua. He said, no, I want a tribe of people to rise up together by the name of Judah. And he said, I want all 12 tribes to fight and push out the last vestiges of Canaanite influence. They were so in bed with Canaanite influence, with entrepreneurship and commerce, that only Joseph, the tribe of Joseph, Simeon, and Judah fought. The rest refused to fight. And Judges 2 says, if you would have fought, you would have procured the entirety of the land. But now look at the language God uses in Judges 2. He says, their gods shall oppress you, and they shall be thorns in your side. And that's what many Christians are feeling. The gods of their sexuality, the gods of their false racial narratives, the gods of their approach to government, Marxism, socialism, all these different views, that's not holistic to Christian worldview. And we're feeling the pressure of coming up under this because it's the same spirit. But the hope was, the scripture said in Judges 2, but God raised up judges. And I believe God is he's going to defend the fighting church, who fights not with blood and muskets and bullets, but with word and prayer and Christian activism, to take pride, and not wrong pride, but loving America and saying we're not just going to lay back and let Satanists and secularists and occultists take over the nation. Because the first thing that comes under the firing squad is always religious freedom, and thus Christianity and the church. So it's time, and God is raising up people like you who are judges, who are speaking truth to power in the culture and raising up others. And if we don't pray and we don't recognize these individuals, many Christians will fight them and feel that they're extremists when they're really people who are fighting for the freedoms of the gospel in America. Thank you.
Amen. Is there any place where anyone watching might be able to check you out? And
yeah, absolutely. Of course, my page, which is Frankie, Frankier Vega, FB at Frankie R. Vega. That's my Facebook, Frankie R. Vega on Instagram. For booking or interviews or ministry, it's just frankievega.org, FRNKIE, that's with an IE.org. And our church, if you want a Spirit-filled Word teaching church in the Atlanta area, we'll be happy to have you. It's ARCcitychurch.org.
I need to get down south. I've been trapped in Michigan too long.
Come on, the air is fine. Amen. We got good leaders that are letting us open our businesses and still practice social distancing or whatever, but at the end of the day, we're able to move and continue our businesses and our church services. Thank God. I can't imagine what our state would be like if Stacey Abrams was the governor.
Yeah, it would probably be. Well, it'll probably be maybe even as bad as it is in Michigan, because there are Democrat states that went ahead and stayed open or whatever, but they didn't see the same hassle that like Kristi Noem or someone who was Republican saw it. I mean, there's obvious bias, but in Michigan, we're just oppressed here.
Whitmire, right? Just to get her out of there, that she's literally not even bending to reason.
No, she's a nut job. And the most recent story is that she went down to Florida after she was telling people, and then came back and told us not to go down to Florida. Like you just can't stop. You just can't stop.
Trust leftists with these top positions of power. I need Christians to understand this. And maybe a couple of years from now, we need to clean up more things with Republicans. But right now, the people in power have been pushing these agendas for years. The tipping point are the secular leftists and Democrats. And people don't like me to name drop like that, but Paul name dropped Hymenius, Alexander Coppersmith. When he addressed false teaching, he addressed Nicolaitans. He addressed them by name and origin of where it was coming from. And I'm sorry to tell you, yes, there's rhinos and wrong people and conservatives and all not doing things right, but the people with the most aggressive agenda against Christianity and holistic family, sexuality, all these things that keep the civilization within God's blessing is secular leftism, and it's trying to attack preachers, the church, pulpits, and Christians in that voting booth. So I have to be a clearing voice, and so are you.
There's the Princeton Seminary. I don't know if you saw this, but Yafton undergrad, they got a leaked video of like them like separating the groups between like people of color and then the white people. And I'm like, they're doing this. They're supposed to be teaching theology. So
horrific.
God is no respecter of persons. We got to remember that.
Yeah.
But it was such a blessing having you on, and I could be talking. I talk long enough, and I know with you combined we could be here all day, and I'm enjoying this conversation. But I'm gonna let you go, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, and thank you to your audience, and thank you for what you do. We got to do it again. I'll see you soon.
Yep. God bless you.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
So thank you guys for joining. Please make sure that you share this video around. I know there's people watching now live, people who watch this later, but go ahead and please share. I had a great time talking, and there's a lot of great nuggets in there that other people need to hear. Please make sure that you guys visit BlackTeaNews.com, check out articles that I've written. I wrote one today about just the state of America today and how it's never really enough, and people try to push a narrative on race, and then we're on to our next thing to outrage about. So please check out that, share those articles, and if you would like, please check out merchandise that I have on the store, like this Denounce White Supremacy, Defeat Joe Biden shirt, and on the back it has a list of Joe Biden's racism, so you can inform the leftists as they just go outrage. And then also, I am not the victim you're looking for, merchandise like that. And also check out Slay Your Fear, available on Amazon and other books I have. So thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you next time.